Hey guys, let's see if Mono Water is viable in the UU tier. I lead Quagsire, they lead Rotom Heat. They immediately switch into the Quackrivel, I set up some Toxic Spikes. They go for the Aqua Step, do barely anything. I go for the Yawn, make the Duck drowsy. They then switch into their Forrestress, I go for some more Toxic Spikes. Get some lefties. I then switch into my Inteleon, they go for the Rapid Spin, get rid of those hazards, get the Speed Boost. I decide to set up a sub, they go for that Volt Switch, break the sub, and immediately pivot into Rotom. Rotom then goes for the Volt Switch, takes out the Inteleon, and uses that to pivot into the Gastrodon. I then decide to go into my Gyarados, immediately start dancing with the Dragons. They go for the Clear Smog, do a little bit, get rid of my boost. I go right for the Earthquake, do a little bit less than half. He goes for an Ice Beam, does a nice chunk to me. I go for another Earthquake, get him down nice and low, but he goes for the Recover, gets it all back. Gets some more from the lefties. He then switches back into the Rotom. I start dancing with the Dragons again. I then go for the Terra Ground, he goes for the Volt Switch, but I'm immune now. Go for the Waterfall, take out the Oven. Fortress then decides to come back out. I go for the Earthquake, do a huge chunk. He decides to set up some spikes. I go for another Earthquake, take him out. I get another Moxie Boost. They then go back into the Quackrivel, go for the Aqua Jet. Gyarados just hangs on. I go for the Earthquake, take out the Duck. My opponent then goes into the Scissor, goes for the Bullet Punch, takes out the Gyarados. My Duck then decides to make an appearance. Go for the Aqua Step, do a good chunk, get some speed, boost some HP. He goes for the Close Combat, Quackrivel just hangs on. He gets a little bit of his lefties back, goes for a Bullet Punch, takes out my Duck. The little heart-shaped fish then gets hit by some spikes. He decides to switch into his Gastrodon. I go for the Rain Dance, get some lefties back. He gets some too. I go for the Wish, he goes for the Recover. We both are trying to get some health back. He goes for the Float Soul, tries to take advantage of my rain. I go for the Icy Wind, get that speed drop. He goes for a Crunch, Alomomola eats that up, retaliates with a Chilling Water. That rain's still coming down. He goes for another Crunch, Alomomola laughs at that, but I get a defense drop. Go for the Icy Wind, get some more speed drops. Alomomola then wishes upon a star, he gets bit again, Elite eats that up. I then decide to switch into my Quagsire, take a little bit of damage, eat up that Crunch, get the defense lower, but I get it all back from the Wish. The Sinnoh Slug then decides to come in, I set up some Toxic Spikes. He then switches again into his Float Soul, gets hit with that Poison, I set up more Spikes. He then goes for the Terra Water Wave Crash, completely one-shots my Quagsire, takes a huge chunk of recoil and damage from the Poison. I then go into my Gastrodon. He switches into his Gastrodon, gets that Poison, I set up some Rocks. He then goes for the Ice Beam, does barely anything. I go for the Earth Power, do barely anything back. He then goes back into the Scissor, takes a little bit of damage. I go for the Earth Power, do a good chunk to him. He gets some lefties back, so do I. He goes for the U-turn, does a huge chunk with the crit, pivots right back into the Gastrodon. I go for another Earth Power, do a little bit to him. He then switches again into the Scissor, who takes some more hazard damage, and then I take him out with the Earth Power. My opponent then forfeits. Good game. At this time I ask you guys to please like, comment, share, and subscribe as it really helps out the channel. Without further ado, let's get into game 2. I start Quagsire, they start off with the Slither Wing and go for that U-turn right away, pivot to Magnezone. I set up some spikes, they then decide to switch again into the Bramble Guys. I go for an Earthquake, do barely anything. I then decide to switch into my Gyarados, he goes for that Rapid Spin, gets rid of my hazards, gets that speed boost. He then switches again into the Magnezone. I start dancing with the Dragons right away. I'm able to outspeed, go for the Earthquake, take him out in one shot. Get that Moxie Boost, he then goes back into the little Tumbleweed. I go for an Ice Fang, take him out. Get another little Moxie Boost. We then get a nice little Gyarados mirror match, he gets that Intimidate going. I go for the Ice Fang, do a huge chunk, and get the lucky flinch. My Gyarados is clearly better, so he decides to switch into the Scream Tail, go for the Ice Fang, do a little bit to him. I go for the Waterfall, do a huge chunk, but he just hangs on. Goes for that Wish, and then decides to switch back into his Gyarados. Gets another Intimidate, but I go for another Dragon Dance. He gets that Wish, gets back to full health. Go for the Ice Fang, do a huge chunk again. He retaliates with the Waterfall. He gets some lefties back. I then go for the Ice Fang, completely whiff. He goes for another Waterfall, but my Gyarados just hangs on. He gets some lefties back, and then switches back into the Scream Tail. I go for the Waterfall, take him out. He goes back into his Gyarados, gets another Intimidate going. I go for the Waterfall, take him out. Get another Moxie. The lead Slitherwing then decides to come back in, goes for the first impression, takes out my Gyarados. I then decide to go into my Inteleon, Go for the first impression, but he can't do anything. I decide to set up a substitute. He then decides to switch into his Armor Rouge. I go for the snipe shot, take him out in one shot. His last mon is then the Slither Wing. I go for the Terrafire, Terra Blast, do a huge chunk, but he just hangs on. He goes for the U-turn, breaks my sub, but then decides to forfeit. Good game. Alrighty, let's get into game 3. I go with the Gyarados, they start with the Earthworm. I go right for that Dragon Dance, get my boost. He goes for the Coil, gets his boost. I fire off for Waterfall, do a nice chunk to Earthworm. He goes for that Rock Slide, does a huge chunk to my Gyarados. Gets some lefties back. I then decide to switch into my Gastrodon. He goes for another Rock Slide, Gastrodon eats that up. Earthworm then goes for the Heavy Slam, Gastrodon eats that up also, sets up some Stealth Rocks. He gets some lefties, so do I. He then decides to switch into his Toxtricity, takes some hazard damage. I decide to switch into my Quagsire. Toxtricity then uses Toxic, poisons my Quagsire. I go for the Earthquake, take him out. He then brings in the Slowbro, takes some damage. I decide to go for the Toxic Spikes. He goes for a Psychic, does a little bit to half, gets that special defense drop. Gets some lefties back. I then decide to switch into my Alola. He goes for a Psychic, does a nice chunk to me. Catch some lefties on each side. Go for the Wish, goes for another Psychic, that's a huge chunk. I go back into the Slug Boy. He goes for a Psychic, Gastrodon eats that right up. Get that Wish, back to full health. Go for an Earth Power, do barely anything to Slowbro. He retaliates with the Avalanche, does barely anything right back. We both get some lefties. I then decide to switch back into the Alola. He goes for the Chilling Water, does barely anything. Gets that attack drop. I go for the Wish, he goes for another Psychic, I just hang on. Get some lefties on each side. I then decide to switch into my Inteleon. He decides to switch into his Hawlucha, take some of that hazard damage. I go for the Ice Beam, take him out. He decides to go into his other bird, take some hazard damage. I go for an Ice Beam, he just hangs on, goes for the T-Wave, paralyzes my Lizard. I then retaliate, go for another Ice Beam, take him out. He then goes back into the Slowbro, takes some more hazard damage and gets poisoned. I go for the Snipe Shot, get a nice crit, do a big chunk. He goes for the Avalanche, does a little bit to my Lizard Boy. He takes some damage over there. He then decides to forfeit. Good game. Alrighty, and that's the video. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments down below and stay tuned for future content. Peace!